I'm Ruth Carter, and I'm about to tell you how 47 years of marriage unraveled with one strange scent, one hidden bottle, and one betrayal I never thought I'd face. You'll hear how my husband and my own daughter-in-law plotted against me, how I uncovered every secret, and how the fire that nearly destroyed my family ended up exposing the truth. This isn't just a story of cheating. It's about survival, revenge, and the strength a woman finds when everyone expects her to break. That's the headline version, the spicy little sentence folks would whisper over coffee if they knew the whole story. But stories don't start with fireworks. They start with a flicker. My name is Ruth Carter. I'm 68 years old, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, an African-American grandmother who knows the smell of cinnamon at 5:45 a.m. better than most know their own reflections. I own Sweet Magnolia Bakery, a handful of warm storefronts where the ovens hum like faithful old friends. For 47 years, I wore a gold band next to a flour-dusted hand and called a man named Harold my husband. Our son, Marcus, ran toward flames for a living. Our daughter-in-law, Tiffany, kept her nails neat and her smiles camera-ready. From the outside, we were the kind of family people pointed to when they needed proof that ordinary goodness still existed. The first wrong note was a scent. Not Harold's aftershave, clean and peppery, but a soft, fruity fog clinging to his collar, like the ghost of an apricot leaning in too close. I stood at the laundry sink and told myself not to be ridiculous. The world is full of apricots, Ruth. It's summer. People stand near people. Shirts collect air the way bread collects heat. Then the small misalignments began. His driver's seat inching farther back than he usually kept it, like someone taller had been there. A gas receipt from a town he hadn't mentioned. 2 wine glasses drying upside down in our rack when I distinctly remembered drinking tea the night before. The laundry basket holding a stranger's thread, silver, thin, nothing a man like Harold would ever wear. Each detail on its own was harmless enough. Together, they added up like unbalanced books, little numbers that didn't lie even when people did. I'm a practical woman. The bakery teaches you that. Yeast is honest. It rises or it doesn't. Sugar burns if you turn your back at the wrong second. The morning after the apricot collar, I got to the shop early and set out the cinnamon knots. Habit steadies hands. I glazed pastries, wrote the specials in tidy loops on the chalkboard, and listened to the bell over the door greet the usual saints. Miss Ella, with her Sunday hat even on Tuesdays. Mr. Hank, whose laugh cracked like a good crust. People ordered, smiled, thanked me. My life put on its apron and went to work. Would you have asked him outright? Some do. But 47 years makes you cautious with dynamite. I watched instead, the way he took calls on the porch at night, turning his back to the kitchen window. The new carefulness around his phone, like it was a newborn that might cry if anyone else touched it. He started stopping by the hardware store after work, then came home smelling like nothing a hardware store sells. He told me the distributor in Macon had messed up a flour order. Strange, since I'm the one who signs those invoices. I asked to see the email. He said he already deleted it. Harold never deleted anything, ever. I wanted to believe in traffic jams and clerical errors, to believe I was just an old woman overeating suspicion. Belief is a soft chair, easy to sink into, hard to rise from. That afternoon, tidying his car the way I always did when he left it muddy, I opened the center console for napkins and there it was. A small bottle we hadn't taken out of a drawer in years. It looked ridiculous in daylight, cheap and intimate at once, like a secret wearing the wrong shoes. I didn't cry. The crying would come later, but in a different language than tears. I sat behind the wheel with the windows down and counted my breaths, the way the choir director taught us once, back when Marcus was 5 and ate powdered sugar straight from the sifter. In, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. The heat lay over Atlanta like a heavy quilt. Somewhere a siren threaded the air and stitched itself away again. You're waiting for me to confront him right there in the driveway, to throw words like plates. I didn't. I'm not afraid of a fight, but I am allergic to losing one by yelling first. Instead, I put the bottle back where I found it, closed the console with a click that felt louder than it was, and went inside to baste chicken with lemon and thyme. Dinner tasted like every other Tuesday. Harold complimented the skin, crisp and golden. He kissed my cheek with a mouth that had learned a new kind of careful. Night is when the mind replays a day and amplifies it. The house made old house sounds, settling beams, sighing vents. I lay beside a man whose breathing I could conduct an orchestra to, and I stared at the ceiling fan tracing circles like it could wind time back if I looked hard enough. In the dark, memory collects like pennies in a jar. The weekend golf trip that lasted one day longer than golf ever does. The second robe hung in our guest bath, smelling faintly of a perfume I didn't own. A text that lit Harold's phone at 11:07 p.m. Just 3 bubbles that vanished when he tilted the screen away. Ruth, you might say, why not talk to Tiffany? Why not ask your son? Because when you've built a life brick by careful brick, you don't start swinging a hammer in the nursery. You check the foundation first. You get the facts. You protect the rooms worth saving. Also, let's tell the truth. Some questions once asked set the world on fire, and my son lives in the fire enough already. I went to church that Sunday and sang Blessed Assurance, a half-pitch lower than the sopranos. Assurance felt like a word from a language I used to be fluent in. The pastor preached from Proverbs, about the wise woman building her house, and I held the hymn book in hands that have kneaded, soothed, and buried. After service, I handed out lemon bars with powdered sugar snowing on the fellowship hall floor. People told me my crust was a miracle. I thought about how miracles and lies both require faith. When the mail came Monday, there was a hotel loyalty program brochure addressed to Harold. He had always teased me for my points and coupons, claimed he was too old to care about perks. I turned the glossy paper over and circled the tagline with my finger. Stay, earn, repeat. The words felt like a dare. Maybe this is the place where you expect a confession, that I had known deep down for years, that we'd been pretending together, 2 actors in a long-running play where no one leaves the stage. It wasn't like that. We were ordinary. We paid the mortgage. We argued about thermostat settings. We danced in the kitchen once in a while when Sam Cooke came on. When he retired, I bought him a watch he never wore and a fishing pole he used twice. There was love. There was also rust. Not all rust squeaks. Some just thins the metal until one day you put weight where you always have and your foot goes clean through. On Tuesday, I took a key from the teacup where we hide spares and drove to a storage unit I've paid for since before the bakery was the bakery. Inside, in a dented metal box that smells like old paper and peppermint, I keep copies of things, deeds, licenses, the kind of documents that look boring until you need them to prove who you are. I added a fresh manila folder, empty except for a label I wrote by hand. Truth. It felt melodramatic. It also felt right. Do I sound cold to you? Maybe I am, in the way a baker is cold to boiling syrup. Step too close, and the sugar sticks. At home that night, I set a plate for Harold and poured him sweet tea. Watched the way his hand hovered over his phone on the table like a bird unsure of landing. He told me a story about a supplier mix-up. I nodded as if I believed it. Belief can be a life raft. It can also be a trap door. When he stepped onto the porch for a call, "Just a minute, Ruth." I stood in the hallway where the air is always a degree cooler and counted the pictures on the wall. Marcus at 8 in his school play, wearing a paper crown. The bakery's grand opening ribbon cut with borrowed ceremonial scissors. Our wedding photo. I look impossibly young. Harold looks like the answer to a question I hadn't known how to ask. I traced the frame with my thumb and felt the grit where dust loves to hide. I didn't make a scene. I made a decision. I wiped my hands on a towel, went to the drawer where old phone numbers live, scribbles from 100 lifetimes, plumbers, choir directors, the woman who did alterations for Tiffany's wedding dress, and found the one I wanted, J. Brooks, private investigator by trade, friend by accident, a man who had once located a missing deacon's brother in less time than it takes meringue to fall. We hadn't spoken in years. The card was the color of black coffee and bent at the corner. I sat at the kitchen table where I've rolled out pie dough through births and funerals, set the card in the square of afternoon light, and dialed. The phone rang twice. A voice I remembered answered, warm as old vinyl. "Brooks." "Jay," I said, steady as a metronome. "It's Ruth." Even before he said my name back, I knew he remembered the way I prefer facts, plain, unbuttered, served hot. I also knew that once I asked my question out loud, there would be no going back to apricots and plausible explanations. "I need you to help me see what I'm already looking at," I told him. Silence, then the sound of a pen uncapping. "Tell me where to start," he said. I looked toward the porch, where Harold's shadow played across the blinds, long and familiar. I looked at the empty chair at our table, the one I keep for the future out of habit, and I thought, not for the first time, that a woman can bake sweetness all her life and still learn, when it matters, how to work with heat. Jay met me at a corner booth in a diner that's been pouring coffee since the city learned how to yawn. He slid in without asking for small talk, set a plain manila envelope on the formica, and looked at me the way a good doctor looks before he delivers news. Steady, respectful, braced for impact. "I'll show you what I've got when you say you're ready," he said. I nodded. I was ready in the way a bridge is ready, bolts tightened, cables humming, everything pretending not to notice the weight it was about to carry. The first photos were nothing anyone could take to court. Harold at a bar on Ponce, leaning too close to a woman in a booth. Harold in a parking lot, hand at the small of her back, the way men put a hand when they've forgotten the word boundary. Faces obscured by angles and shadows, like the night itself was trying to cover for them. I studied the images until the buzzing in my ears settled into something like a rhythm. A bracelet flashed in one frame, a quick glint, nothing more. My mind tried to place it and then, like a polite guest, looked away. "Could be a coworker," I said. I didn't even believe myself long enough to finish the sentence. Jay sat with the patience of a man who has watched 1,000 first dominoes tip. "We'll keep going," he said. "Facts first. Facts first." I repeated it in my head on the drive back to the bakery, past porches where folks were shelling late peas, past the mural of John Lewis that makes me lift my chin every time. At Sweet Magnolia, the ovens breathed sugar air, and the bell over the door went on ringing like nothing in the world could ever break. Miss Ella told me her grandson made the honor roll. Mr. Hank asked if I'd try a bourbon glaze on the chocolate cake. The register pinged. I smiled on autopilot. My hands braided cinnamon ropes, and somewhere under the movement a question kept tapping. Who is she? Jay worked the city's edges and its habits. He didn't explain how. I didn't ask. He texted when there was something to see, and I'd step into the office at the back of the bakery, close the door, and watch on a screen the life I hadn't authorized. One clip showed them at a restaurant, the kind with napkins too stiff to wipe anything real. Harold reached across the table and brushed something from the woman's hair. The camera drifted as if embarrassed. Another clip was a hotel hallway, beige on beige, the universal color of secrets. The door opened. 2 bodies slipped through. The door clicked shut. If you want to hate the other woman, it helps not to know her. But life and cruelty share a taste for irony. The next set of photos landed like a stone in a pie that was supposed to be cooling. Harold and the woman in a parking lot, the light catching her wrist just right. Not just a bracelet, the bracelet. A thin gold chain with a tiny magnolia charm. My gift to Tiffany the night before her wedding, engraved with a date and a promise I had believed we were all making together. I didn't say her name out loud. Saying a name makes it a spell, and I wasn't ready to conjure that particular demon into the room. I stared at the charm until the little flower blurred into the head of a pin. Then I wiped my eyes with the corner of my apron and zoomed in farther than any human eye ever needed to zoom. The camera had done me no favors, and every favor at once. Her nails were the same almond shape she always wore, pale pink with a gold stripe. Her Sunday nails, she called them. And there, just above the magnolia charm, the faint white crescent of a scar on her wrist from the time she dropped a champagne flute at our New Year's brunch and laughed off the blood like it was confetti. "Jay," I said into the phone, my voice lower than usual, like I was speaking from the floorboards. "It's her." Silence, not surprise, only the kind of quiet a man keeps for someone else's storm. He cleared his throat. "There's more you should hear before you decide your next step." We met again, not at the diner, but in his cramped office above a barber shop where the clippers sang through a thin ceiling. He set a small speaker on the desk and hit play. Voices filled the room. Harold's first, softened the way men soften when they want something. Tiffany's next, higher, trailing laughter that used to ring in my kitchen on Sundays, while she stirred salad dressing and told me about the week. They weren't just meeting, they were planning. Not the sweet, stupid planning of escape movies, the cold kind, numbers and timelines, who would say what to whom. My name came up more than once. "The old hag," Tiffany said with a snort I recognized as the sound she made when someone cut her off in traffic. She said it like a private joke, and Harold laughed like a man who had forgotten every vow his teeth once formed. They talked about the bakery like a pie cooling on a windowsill, easy to lift, easy to carry off. "She's tired," Harold said, as if he'd examined my bones. "She'll cave." They speculated about the house, how to push, whether to claim I wasn't fit, whether I'd hand over keys if the right papers were waved in the right rooms. There was a list, bulleted, if malice can be tidy. I felt a part of myself get very still, like water deciding to become ice. I asked Jay to rewind. He did. I listened again, not because I needed more pain, because I needed every angle of it, the way a baker needs to know exactly where the oven runs hot. You might think I would have stormed out and driven to Marcus's station right then, slammed the door, dragged him into the fluorescent light, and detonated our family in a room where men hang their helmets. I didn't. My boy runs into burning buildings for strangers. I was not going to set one in his home without a plan for the exits. When the recording stopped, Jay watched me like he was waiting to see which direction my gravity would choose. "Do you want me to keep going, Sung?" he asked. "Keep going," I said, "but send everything you've got so far." I wanted the files in my hands, not because I planned to wave them like a flag, but because holding truth has a way of making a woman stand up straighter. On the drive home, I passed our church. The sign out front read, in neat black letters, "Be still and know." I parked and sat there long enough for the dashboard to tick cool. Be still and know what? That I wasn't crazy. That the apricot perfume had a name. That betrayal in a family is less like a knife and more like a slow leak. You don't hear it until the floor sags. At home, Harold was in his chair, watching a game like it could teach him anything about loyalty. He muted the volume when I walked in, that same new carefulness settling over his face. "You were late," he said, like a man taking attendance. "Bakery ran long," I answered, which was a kind of truth. I stood behind his chair and took in the back of his head, the soft wave of hair I used to smooth with my palm. 100 memories queued up like polite parishioners, and then, one by one, sat down again. In the kitchen, I opened the drawer with the dull pencils and the rubber bands, fished out my address book, and found Selina Price, attorney, friend from the old neighborhood, the woman who once explained a contract to me like it was a recipe card. I didn't call her, not yet. I copied her number onto a sticky note and pressed it to the inside of a cupboard, where I could see it every morning when I reached for the flour. Insurance, not panic. For 3 days, I lived in a world where the surface tension never broke. I served scones to people who would share the video when it finally appeared online. I checked the pilot lights on the bakery ovens as if their small blue tongues could lick the edges of my fear clean. I answered Tiffany's text about Sunday dinner with a thumbs-up emoji, and then put the phone face down like it had sworn at me. At night, when Harold stepped onto the porch to take his calls, I stood in the hallway and looked at the framed photos like they were a jury. Did I miss the signs? Did I love a man who'd always had this kind of hunger? Or did something get hollowed out over the years until he poured the worst of himself into the nearest available shape? Every question I asked came back with another question stitched to it. I was starting to understand that answers weren't going to make me feel better. They were going to make me precise. Jay sent a final package that week, a memory drive, labeled in his cramped print. I took it to the storage unit, to the dented metal box that holds the proof of my life, and slid it into the folder I'd named Truth. The box clanged shut with the small satisfaction of something decided. On my way out, I stood in the strip of shade beside the building and watched a line of ants navigate a crack in the pavement. One by one, disciplined, relentless, they found their way around the obstacle and kept going. It wasn't a sign, it was a reminder. The world runs on tiny, consistent choices. When I got home, Harold was in the shower, singing low the way he does when he thinks life is merciful. I leaned my hip against the bathroom door frame and listened for a moment to the man who had once been the safest place in my world. And then I walked to the bedroom window, slid 2 inches of glass higher for air, and made a promise to the part of me that was still, somehow, tender. I would not break things I intended to keep. I would not throw fire where I needed light. I would, instead, do what I have always done best. I would measure. I would gather. I would wait for the moment the timer in my bones rang clear, and when it did, I would take what was mine out of the heat, whole, intact, and ready to be served on my own terms. Selina's office sits over a nail salon that smells like acetone and gossip. She keeps the blinds half closed and her desk immaculate, a courtroom on 4 legs. When I finished telling her, she didn't offer pity, just a legal pad and a sentence that felt like the click of a seat belt. We play offense by playing defense. "What do you want to keep?" she asked. "My name," I said. "My house, my bakery, my boy." Then we get boring in a hurry. Her pen moved. 2-signature rule on all operating accounts, update beneficiaries, revoke latent powers of attorney, passwords rotated, corporate minutes drafted yesterday and notarized tomorrow. If they try something cute, they trip over paper. You might think that's overkill. You'd be surprised how quickly love stories turn into paperwork. By noon, we had a list longer than a grocery run before Thanksgiving. I signed where she pointed, blue ink blooming like certainty. We filed notices nobody reads until they matter. We added language Harold would hate in a bylaw he'd never bothered to learn. It wasn't drama, it was architecture. At the bakery, I became the kind of meticulous that scares flour into standing at attention. Staff schedules got redundancies, deliveries got audits. I changed the alarm code, something only my hands could remember. I boxed up old ledgers and carried them to the storage unit where truth had its own folder now. When I locked the metal door, the clank felt like the smallest, kindest verdict the world could give me that day. You want to know about Marcus? Of course you do. He called between calls, radio static leaking through his, "Hey, Ma." They'd pulled a toddler from a second-story bedroom, found a granddad who'd decided oxygen tanks were a suggestion. He asked for lemon bars if I had the time. I said I always had time. "You and Tiff coming Sunday?" I asked, because the script still existed and I hadn't decided when to put it down. "She's been busy," he said, the way a man says tired when he means empty. Maybe just me. Later, Tiffany texted a string of hearts and a rain check, Mom. The word mom sat there blinking. She knew exactly which door she was knocking on with that word. I thumbed back a thumbs up and set the phone face down on the counter, like I might be tempted to read between the pixels if I kept looking. Not everything in a life reorders itself just because your heart does. Miss Ella still wanted extra glaze for the Lord, and Mr. Hank still argued that bourbon belonged in frosting the way hope belongs in funerals, quietly, invisibly, doing its work. People pressed cash into the tip jar and asked after Harold as if he were a permanent house on their street. I said he was fine. He was. He was also a stranger on my porch most nights, speaking softly to a softness that wasn't mine. Jay sent me a transcript, shortened, names stripped, dates intact. He was sparing me detail without sparing me truth. They weren't just in love with each other. They were enamored with the idea of my absence. Tiffany, the girl who cried when her pie crust cracked the Thanksgiving before her wedding, outlined my removal like she was replacing a recipe card. "She's sentimental," she said. "If we push through the sun, she'll fold." People underestimate women who bake. They think we live in sugar. They forget we work in heat. If you're wondering why I didn't walk into the firehouse and tell my son everything, here's the answer. I know what fire does to a man's insides. It has to be contained, to be survivable. You don't throw all your pain at a person whose job is to keep a lid on other people's panic. You build a line. You hold it. You wait for wind to shift. Selena and I built lines. She taught me phrases like fiduciary misconduct and derivative action, and smiled at the face I made. "It's just a recipe," she said. "Dry ingredients first, then wet. Mix until combined. Don't overwork." We updated the trust that holds the house. We created a policy at Sweet Magnolia. No related parties in management decisions without board review. There was no board before lunch. There was one by dinner. Me, Selena, and Pastor Green in a tie. I bought his wife for their 30th. Harold had never wanted a board. He has one now. Does this sound cold? Good. Cold saved me from doing the warm, stupid thing at least a dozen times that week. Warm makes late-night knocks on doors and messy confrontations that end with someone sleeping in a car. Cold writes emails with subject lines like amendment to operating agreement and reallocation of key holder access. Cold orders labeled folders. cold keeps copies. Tiffany stopped by the bakery on Thursday, lip gloss like polished shells, those almond nails clicking on the glass as she pointed to the lemon knots. Marcus is obsessed with these, she said, like I didn't know what my own child loved. She handed me a tote filled with influencer-looking snacks and said, "You have to try these, Ruth. They're so you." The magnolia charm winked on her wrist. She looked me straight in the eye with a steadiness you earn only by believing you are invisible. I boxed her pastries with ribbons and a sticker, and a smile people write good reviews about. As she left, her perfume hung in the doorway a beat too long. Apricot, yes, but layered now with something sharper, like ambition had a scent. That night, the house performed its nightly play, Harold's shower running, the TV murmuring, the porch phone call, the careful kiss on my cheek. I went to the garage and stood with the tools we actually use and the ones married men buy to feel like they build things. On the shelf sat a box of latex gloves and a can of something industrial that we keep for the kind of messes you do not write about in cookbooks. I took nothing. I touched nothing. But I looked until the shapes became ideas and the ideas became briefly temptation. Then I turned off the light and went inside. This was not the night. I had no interest in the right act done at the wrong time. If you're asking whether I ever wavered, yes. In the dark, the word divorce felt like a door that would admit too much cold. I pictured holidays as empty chairs. I pictured Marcus's face learning its new geometry. Then I pictured my name printed on a contract without my consent. Pictured my ovens cold because someone with my last name and no heart for Dawn had decided cash flow was a hobby. The emptiness of the first picture hurt. The emptiness of the second enraged. Rage is noisy. Resolve is quiet. I chose the quiet thing. On Friday, I walked the block with Loretta Johnson, my neighbor with lavender in every drawer, and a laugh that can be heard 2 houses over. Loretta sees everything without making a parade of it. "You sleeping over next week?" she asked, like I'd already told her my plan. "If I needed to," I said. "You always got a bed at mine," she said, hooking her arm through mine, "and a window with the right angle." Back home, I wrote down 3 dates on an index card, Marcus's next 2 overnight shifts, and the Wednesday in between when the bakery can run without me. I tucked the card behind the spice rack, between cumin and smoked paprika. A woman is allowed her rituals. Jay called that night. "I have one more thing," he said, voice careful. "Audio from a car ride. You're on speaker." I braced. The clip was short. Tiffany's laughter first, then Harold's voice softer than it had been for years. "She thinks I'm in Macon, babe," he said. "Told her there was a flower mess." Tiffany giggled. "Old ladies love messes," she said. "Gives them something to fix." He laughed too loud, like that could make the sentence less cruel. Then, after a beat, he said, "Soon as we get her to sign, you can run the front of the bakery. You'd be good at it." People say they want the truth. They don't always survive the sound it makes. I did, because I'd already decided I would. I closed my eyes and pictured my front counter, the glass case with its tiny fingerprints from 100 eager children, the chalkboard I write on at dawn. I pictured Tiffany behind it, all posture and polish, and felt a heat rise in me that had nothing to do with ovens. I needed one more thing before the timer could ring, a story to tell the neighborhood while my real story played out, a harmless alibi. So I registered for a baking workshop in Nashville. I didn't plan to attend, printed the confirmation, and left it on the kitchen counter with a highlighter circle. "Thought I'd learn a new croissant fold," I told Harold over dinner, light as powdered sugar. He nodded like a man relieved to have a schedule handed to him. "Have fun," he said. "You deserve it." Yes, I thought, slicing into chicken with the good knife. I do. If you're wondering when the glue entered my mind, I can't give you an hour. Ideas arrive the way rain does in summer. Heat builds, air changes, and then everything lets go at once. What I can tell you is this. I cleaned my kitchen twice that weekend, checked batteries and smoke alarms, ironed a blouse I hadn't worn in years, and slept with my shoes by the bed. Preparation is just another form of love for the woman you plan to be when you stop waiting. Sunday after church, Marcus ate lemon bars at my counter and asked if I needed him to fix the wobbly porch step. I told him I'd already put in a work order with a handyman. He kissed my forehead, his lips chapped from heat and wind. "You okay, Ma?" he asked, firefighter eyes noticing things he couldn't yet name. "I'm measuring," I said. He nodded, not understanding but trusting the answer the way you trust a firefighter who tells you, quietly, to move 3 steps to the left. Later, after he left, I stood in the doorway he'd just walked through and repeated the word to the empty room. Measuring, heat, time. I didn't pray for forgiveness that night. I prayed for precision, for timing, for a clean line between justice and spectacle. The clock over my stove ticked its patient tick, and I swear it sounded like a metronome only I could hear. When it finally settled into a tempo my bones agreed with, I did what bakers have always done. I set my station. I laid out what I would need and what I would not. I wrote a single sentence on the back of a recipe card and slid it into my pocket. Do not break what you intend to keep. And then I waited, not like a victim, not like a saint, like a woman who knows exactly how hot her oven runs and exactly what she's pulling out when the bell rings. I didn't need courage that week. I needed sequence. Grief makes a mess. Sequence cleans a counter. On Tuesday, I set the printout for the Nashville workshop where Harold would see it, a cheerful flyer promising lamination secrets and butter percentages, as if any of that mattered. "I'll be gone overnight," I said, folding a sweater into a small bag that made a soft show of leaving. He glanced at the highlighted date and nodded like a man who'd just been handed permission. Loretta met me on her porch with a glass of sweet tea and a look that said she knew how to keep a secret without ever having to say she could. "You can see your upstairs window from here," she said, tilting her chin toward the angle she'd scouted 30 years earlier for birdwatching and neighborhood drama. "Light hits it just right after 6. The house felt different on the day the timer in my bones hit ready. Not hostile, hollow. I walked through each room like I was checking pews before a service, hands grazing chairbacks, lips counting what would remain mine when the storm passed. The blue pie dish from my mother, the quilt with the crooked star, the framed menu from the bakery's first day. I wasn't looking for permission from objects. I was giving them notice. "We are going to survive this," I told them. "And if that sounds foolish to you, you've never asked your own life to hold still while you change it. You'll ask me how I did the switch. You want brands, steps, YouTube clarity. That's not the story I'm telling and not advice I'm giving. I will say this. Some bottles look alike until they don't, and some hands remember fine motor skills long after a heart would rather shake. I replace something that was meant to make things slide with something that guarantees they don't. I wore caution like a second skin. I put everything back as if I had never been there at all. The way a woman leaves a room when she knows men will inspect it later. Evidence had been the first half of my protection. Distance would be the second. I made the house remember what it needed to without me in it. Nothing cinematic. No hidden red lights, no spy movie nonsense, just enough for the truth to sit in a folder and not argue with anyone. Loretta's guest room smelled like lavender and righteous friendship. I set my little bag on her chair and took the window seat, the cushion indented by decades of ordinary watching. First day of school photos, Summer thunderstorms, Mr. Givens and his ridiculous inflatable Santa that had nearly taken flight the Christmas. The wind tried to run away with it. Across the street, my porch lights warmed on a timer I'd set years ago for our vacations. It felt indecent almost, how normal the glow looked. Inside that light was a woman who had packed a sweater to a class she wasn't going to and was instead kneeling by a neighbor's window, steady as a surgeon. Harold came home tight with anticipation, that new carefulness on his face like powder you can't quite blend. He showered longer than he needed to, left water hissing while he checked his messages, then stood in the hallway too long pretending to choose a shirt. I wanted to call out the door. You never cared about callers until you had a reason to. Instead, I pressed my palm into the windowsill and counted the beats of my own pulse. Tiffany's car arrived with its music low and smug. She walked in without knocking. Of course she did. If you're hoping I felt a thrill, I didn't. What I felt was a thread pulled taut from the base of my skull to the backs of my knees, that hum a string makes when tuned to the exact right note. I watched shadows lengthen across my bedroom like the world was drawing breath and holding it. I watched the point at which a decision becomes an event. Here is where you might accuse me of cruelty. That's fair. I thought about it too, about what line I was drawing and whether I would like the woman who crossed it when she saw herself on the other side. I also thought about my name on a deed and on payroll checks, about my son's face the day he stood in our kitchen wearing his First Station t-shirt, about the word mom blinking on my phone from a liar's thumb. Justice and spectacle are cousins. I had prayed not to invite the wrong one to dinner. I needed a nudge from the universe that said, if you proceed, proceed clean. The nudge came as mundane as a calendar alarm. Marcus's shift. I had memorized his overnights the way I memorize oven temperatures, not to control the world, but to move through it with care. He was on duty. I had told myself that meant he would be safe from seeing what he should never have to see. But safety is a mean little gambler. The city calls who it calls. Inside my house, laughter swelled and then thinned, the kind of laughter people use to pretend something isn't happening right up until it does. There's a moment in any kitchen when heat finally tips sugar into caramel. It looks like nothing until it's everything. The window told me nothing useful, just hinted shapes and the way bodies lean when they mean to be unkind. The next part, this matters. I did not start a fire. I did not light a match. I do not recommend, instruct, or glamorize the kind of thing that risks lives. I created smoke that would read as trouble without being trouble. It was theater, not arson, a summons without a blaze. That distinction kept its own vigil in my chest. I moved with a steadiness I'd borrowed from 12,000 mornings of measuring flour. Portion, weigh, stop. The kitchen obeyed with the grudging loyalty of a long-married partner, complaining under its breath, doing as asked. From Loretta's window, I saw the first curl lift, thin as a sigh, then a thicker birth of gray, enough to worry good neighbors who do not wait to see how bad something gets before they act. Loretta's hand found mine and squeezed once. Not a question, just a covenant. Sirens began, faint at first, a sound that lives in my city the way birdsong lives in others. The wail grew, layered with urgency and promise. We are coming. We are coming. Hold on. If there was a prayer in me then, it wasn't for humiliation. It was for clean lines and no harm, no flames to chase, no lungs to burn. The point was never their pain. The point was the light. Secrets rot in humidity. They bleach fast under fluorescence. The trucks rounded the corner like a history lesson, red and bright and unashamed of their noise. A crowd did what crowds do, assembled from nowhere with phones held the way offerings used to be held. I felt the ground of my neighborhood shift under the weight of what it thought it knew about us. The front door gave on the first hit, my old frame surrendering like it understood the assignment. Marcus was first through, my boy moving the way he moves when his brain is pure math and muscle. He called out, voice filling our rooms, a liturgy I've heard him recite half my life. Fire department, call out if you can hear me. There's a tone he uses in that line, firm without panic, that once calmed a neighbor's toddler better than any mother could. He swept the living room with his eyes, posted his men, took the stairs 2 at a time. From across the street, I counted steps I used to count when he was small, and we played games that ended with me scooping him up at the top and flying him back down again. There exists a kind of silence that isn't quiet at all, just the space after a truth arrives, and before anyone figures out where to put it. The house held that silence for 1 heartbeat, 2. Then came the halt, the barked order turning into a strangled sound, the expletive clipped short, professionalism wrestling with blood, and then the kind of busy that follows discovery. Blankets grabbed, eyes averted, dignity offered to people who had never offered any to themselves. Phones came out. You can legislate a city's zoning faster than you can legislate a crowd's curiosity. But even in the flurry, I saw small mercies. A firefighter stepping in front of a lens, a neighbor turning her face away like she'd remembered her own worst day and decided not to make mine worse. I did not walk across the street. I stood where I was and focused on the one thing I could do that wouldn't ruin anything else. Breathe in for 3, out for 3. The way I taught myself behind the wheel of Harold's car, the day a cheap bottle told me the truth. Loretta didn't let go of my hand. Be still and know, she whispered, borrowing my church's sign for me and making it fit. What did I feel when Marcus came back out, jaw set, eyes like doors he had slammed shut from the inside? Not triumph, not even relief. A morning so clean it stung. The kind you feel when a storm passes and you realize the tree you loved was hollow long before the wind. An EMT brushed past us with a stretcher and a look of practiced neutrality. Someone from the crowd hissed a laugh they'd delete later. A younger firefighter, baby face, ears pink, kept saying, "Ma'am, step back," to nobody in particular. The night tilted from chaos toward protocol, that safety net humans have learned to weave after centuries of our own worst instincts. If you came into this part of my story expecting a cackle, you don't know me. Spectacle did not feed me. Precision did. The result was public because the choices that forced it into being were public too. Walked into restaurants on bright afternoons, paraded through hotel lobbies like shame, couldn't possibly recognize them there. I had not planned for my son to be the one to lay a blanket where intimacy had curdled into farce. But sons go where the city sends them. The city had knocked on our door, and my son had, as always, answered. When the trucks finally quieted, when the blue lights pulsed like exhausted hearts, I closed my eyes against the glare and asked myself the only questions that mattered. Was anyone hurt? No. Did the truth stand up on its own 2 feet without me propping it? Yes. Was there anything I needed to do next that could not wait until the morning? No. Morning would bring paperwork and signatures, meeting rooms where shame wears suits. It would bring Marcus's silence, which is a language I speak better than most. It would bring the small, faithful acts that turn aftermath into life again. Resetting an alarm code, mixing batter, tying on an apron when the sun is still thinking about whether to get out of bed. For now, I watched the last curl of smoke unspool into the night and thought, not for the first time, how much of survival is simply refusing to be hurried by other people's chaos. I had set the timer. It had rung. What was mine? would not burn. By the time the last blue light stopped strobing across my curtains, the house had settled into the kind of hush that makes you hear the refrigerator think. Marcus didn't come in. I didn't expect him to. A man can haul two people out of a tangle he should never have had to see and still not be ready to walk through his mother's door. I made coffee I didn't drink and set 2 mugs anyway, because muscle memory is its own stubborn faith. Morning arrived with its ordinary insistence. Trash truck on the corner, joggers slapping pavement, the paper landing with a thud that said it knew and didn't want to. I dressed the way I do for funerals, neat, respectful, with pockets that could carry what needed carrying. I slid a folder into my bag, tabs labeled in Selena's tidy hand, and a small tube with a label loud enough to convince strangers of mercy. Don't ask what was inside. The point was never harm. It was punctuation. Hospitals smell like bleach and apologies. At the desk, I said my name, my relationship, the room number I'd learned from a text Jay didn't need to send but did. The nurse lifted an eyebrow, met my gaze, and then, God bless women who have done this too many times, buzzed me through. I walked down a hallway where grief wore 1,000 uniforms and stopped at a door that used to be the border of a life and was now just hinges and paint. They looked smaller on upright beds than they had under blankets and towels. Harold with a paper bracelet around the wrist I'd once held at a county fair. Tiffany with her mouth pressed thin, her face a study in angles and audacity. Shame lay over the room like a sheet they couldn't crawl out from under. Harold tried a smile that had worked for 4 decades. It slid off me like cheap glitter. "You came," he said, as if I were a surprise party he didn't deserve. "I did," I said, and set the tube on the tray table with the politeness we reserve for casseroles. Tiffany glanced at it, almost grateful, then looked at me like she wanted to borrow my spine and didn't know how to ask. "What are you going to do, Ruth?" Harold's voice had 2 notes fighting, defense and the old, familiar plea. I took the folder from my bag and laid out pages the way I lay out mise en place. Everything visible, nothing dramatic. "We're going to sign," I said, "and then we are going to go our separate ways like civilized people who forgot how." Tiffany scoffed, but her eyes flicked to the letterhead. She recognized Selena's name. Of course she did. Ambition studies us more closely than love ever did. I didn't raise my voice. Rage is theater. Precision is court-ready. "These," I tapped, "formalize your exit from my business. You are barred from accounts you never should have touched. You will not contact vendors, staff, or press. You will not step into Sweet Magnolia without my written invitation, which you will never receive." I slid the divorce petition next. "This ends a marriage you ended already. You will vacate my home. There is a schedule for retrieving your personal belongings that does not include 1 foot over my threshold." "Ruth," Harold started and then stopped. He used to be good at sentences. He had gone out of practice. "You can hire counsel," I said. "You should. I have copies ready for yours. Decline to sign today, and Selena will file an emergency motion for injunctive relief before your discharge papers finish printing. Refuse then, and we'll proceed without your cooperation. Either way, the result is the same." Tiffany reached for the tube, the way people reach for relief even when they don't deserve it. "Is this for the pain?" "It will make you remember this day," I said, "and it won't kill you." She didn't like the answer, but her hand closed around plastic anyway. I did not stay to watch consequence meet skin. That was not the point, and never had been. A knock. Marcus filled the doorway in a clean t-shirt, hair damp, the blue of exhaustion under his eyes making him look both like my boy and like someone the city had borrowed for too long. He saw me first, and something unclenched a fraction. Then his gaze slid to the beds, and everything in his face relocked, a house rebarring itself after a break-in. "Mom," he said, and then didn't say anything else because the English language hadn't invented a word for that room yet. I met him halfway, put my palm to his cheek, the way I did when he was 2, and burned his lip on tomato soup. "You are not responsible for any of this," I said. "You are responsible for you. That's enough. Do you need me to?" He gestured at the papers, at the people, at the wreckage. "I need you to go home and sleep," I said. "Then come to the bakery when you wake up. We open at 5. We have lemon bars." The corner of his mouth tried to remember how to lift. He nodded once, backed out, and the room lost its only decent oxygen. Harold cleared his throat. "Ruth, we cannot," I said. "Harold, I listened to you call me an old hag into a dashboard microphone. I heard you plan to steal my house from under my feet like I was asleep for the last 47 years. We are past sentences that begin with 'we.' I left them with pens and paperwork and a nurse who wore neutrality like armor. In the corridor, I leaned against the cool wall tile and let my breath do its old, faithful counting. In, 2, 3. Out, 2, 3. A family walked by speaking Spanish soft as tissue paper. The world kept moving. It always does. Our personal apocalypses fit into its timetable, whether we like it or not. At Sweet Magnolia, I hung a sign that said "Open," because that is what you do when the world tries to close you. Staff gathered with faces that had already heard enough to form opinions and enough decency to keep them quiet. I told them a version of the truth that belonged to them: leadership change, continuity of pay, a reminder that our brand is kindness baked at 375 degrees. Mr. Hank hugged me across the counter with a gruffness that made my ribs creak. Miss Ella prayed over the lemon glaze like it could catch blessings the way it catches light. Selena called to say the hospital had faxed witness signatures. "They blinked," she said, satisfaction tucked in at the edges like hospital corners on a clean sheet. "We'll file by 3. Board resolution goes out at 4. Vendor notice at 5. You're protected." "Good," I said. The word felt like bread coming out of the oven at exactly the right minute. Golden, done, sighing as it settles. The internet did what the internet does, turned rumor into spectacle and spectacle into content. Loretta appointed herself my unofficial press secretary, scolding away the worst of the gawkers with a lavender-scented glare. People messaged me links I didn't open. I posted a photo of a pecan pie with a caption about gratitude and hours of operation. I did not mention hospitals or glue, or the way Tiffany's voice had sharpened into something that could cut a woman if she stood too close. Mid-afternoon, Pastor Green appeared in my doorway with a tie I'd bought his wife for their anniversary, a quiet that could have been prayer. He didn't ask for details. He handed me a verse on a card in his tidy pen: "Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly," and squeezed my hand like punctuation. "You doing all 3, he said, "even if nobody on Facebook can tell." "Mercy," I said, tasting the word like something I needed practice with. "Mercy isn't the absence of consequence," he said. "It's the absence of cruelty." That evening, when the bell over the door finally stilled and the bakery smelled like sugar cooling, Marcus came in with a duffel bag and the look of a man who had been brave too many times in 24 hours. He set the bag by the back door as if it might offend the pastries if it got any closer. "Got room?" he asked. "Always," I said. He leaned against the stainless table, eyes tracing the familiar geography of mixers and racks. "How long did you know?" he asked. Not accusation, calculation, a man aligning his memories with new maps. Long enough to learn the shape of it, I said. Long enough to make sure when I moved I didn't break what I meant to keep. He nodded, stared at his hands, pinched a crumb from the counter, and smiled a small, tired smile at the taste. Lemon, he said, as if he'd discovered evidence of a benign conspiracy. We didn't talk about Harold. Not yet. Grief in this house would be served in slices, small enough to swallow. We talked about schedules instead, his next shifts, my early mornings, how we'd park so the neighbors didn't make up a new story to replace the old one too quickly. He took the guest room like he had when he was in high school, left the door ajar the way he does when he needs air and can't say so. I checked locks the way Selena had taught me, literal and figurative, and stood a moment on the back steps listening to Atlanta's night voice. Somewhere, a train complained to the dark. Somewhere, a couple argued about nothing with the intensity of people who still believe in repair. Somewhere, a screen glowed with our ruin, and someone laughed who would one day need the kind of mercy they didn't show us. What now? I asked the air, not because it would answer, but because asking is how you clear a path. Now, we file, we serve papers, we change codes and roll out a new seasonal menu and take pastor's wife a pie. We do our books, we sleep, or we try. We tell the truth when asked and keep silence when invited to gossip. We let Marcus exist in the space between sun and man and do not tug him toward either shore. We learn the taste of solitude without letting it turn bitter. We stay open. We stay kind. We stay ready. Before I turned out the bakery lights, I wrote 3 words on the chalkboard under tomorrow's specials. Not a sermon, not a threat, just a recipe for the next day of a life I was remaking to my own measurements. Heat, time, rise. The internet's attention span is a mayfly with a megaphone. By midweek, the noise had thinned to a hum, still there, still annoying, but no longer vibrating the dishes. What remained were the things that matter when spectacle packs up. Signatures drying, locks that click, a son who sleeps with his door ajar, and a bakery that opens at 5 because grief can't keep a croissant from proofing. Selena moved like a woman who has seen every variety of human combustion. Temporary orders are in, she said, sliding papers across my counter between racks of cooling pecan tassies. Exclusive occupancy of the home to you, protective injunction on the business, vendor notices sent, board resolution logged. She sipped coffee black and frowned at my sugar jar, like it had personally offended her cholesterol. Their counsel asked for a meeting. Of course they did, I said, and tied an apron I didn't need just to keep my hands from making fists. The conference room we rented by the hour was beige on beige, the Switzerland of rooms. Harold came in first, thinner than last week's version of him, ring finger bare, jaw working on words that didn't arrive. Tiffany followed in oversized sunglasses, the magnolia bracelet gone. I noticed the absence, the way a tongue finds a missing tooth. Their attorney began with the tone men use when they think professionalism can airbrush motive. Mrs. Carter, there's been publicity, he said, sliding a printout toward Selena as if she didn't already have 10 better copies. My clients are concerned about reputational harm. Selena didn't bother to look down. My client is concerned about theft, conspiracy, and a marital breach documented 6 ways from Sunday, she said. Reputation is a mirror. They made the face. Tiffany took off the glasses. Her eyes were rimmed red but dry. You didn't have to make it public, she said to me, like she was negotiating the price of lemons at a summer market. I didn't, I answered. You did, in restaurants, in hotel hallways, in a house where you weren't invited. Privacy is for people who keep their vows. Harold cleared his throat. Ruth, we could keep this civilized. We are, I said, and nodded at the stack in front of him. Civilization is paperwork. There was an attempt at counter-theater, hints that I had engineered a scene, questions about smoke, insinuations about malice. Selena's eyebrows barely moved. If your clients believe a crime occurred, I invite them to file a report and testify under oath, she said. Meanwhile, we have audio of them planning to misappropriate a small business. Should we press the district attorney to weigh which story the city wants to hear first? Their attorney pivoted with the grace of a man who saves face for a living. We're here to discuss settlement terms. We did. It wasn't pretty or cinematic. It was columns of numbers and dates on calendars and phrases like hold harmless and no contact. Harold asked for a pickup time to collect his tools. Saturday at 10, I said. A friend will supervise. He looked up at the word friend like it had betrayed him. He used to be mine. It wasn't the friend I meant. Outside, after, Selena exhaled a long lawyer's exhale. They wanted a fight, she said. You gave them a plan. She squeezed my shoulder. Plans win. At Sweet Magnolia, routine became refuge and witness. We added a small hand-lettered sign by the register, discount for firefighters and medics, and I watched strangers in uniform soften at being seen. Marcus pretended to hate the attention and then took 3 extra lemon bars for the station. He slept, woke, ate in small, bright bursts, then fell quiet again, the way men do when the body is busy trying to sort the soul's paperwork. One evening, the chaplain from his station stopped by with a haircut too recent to be casual. He bought a pecan pie and said, "We have counseling if he wants it, if you want it." He slid a card across the counter like he was offering absolution without paperwork. I tucked it in the flower bin, a sacred place in my house. Not everyone came to bless me. A woman I didn't recognize walked in, ordered a coffee she didn't drink, and announced loudly to nobody in particular, "Some folks just love a public show." Loretta materialized behind her like an Old Testament warning in a lavender sweater. "Some folks love manners," she said. The woman took her coffee to go. I drove to see Jay with an envelope that had his name and a number inked in my neatest script. He met me at the diner with the same steady eyes and the kind of patience people usually save for slow violins. "You don't owe me more than we agreed," he said, pushing the envelope back. "I owe you for the part where you looked at me like I wasn't crazy," I said, pushing it forward again. "That isn't on the invoice." He slid it into his jacket. "Keep your copies," he said, as if there were a universe in which I wouldn't. "And Ruth, stop reading the comments." "I don't," I lied. He gave me the look of a man who can spot a lie by the way it blinks. At church on Sunday, Pastor Green said the thing only pastors and old women with good sense know how to say, without making it sound like a pillow over your face. Some victories don't feel like anything. After the benediction, a teenager I'd never seen before hovered by the pew like a skittish foal. "My mom left my dad last year," she said, voice small, but decided. "He was not good." She saw the pictures and said, "Maybe I'm not crazy." She asked me to tell you thank you. The girl pressed a folded note into my hand and fled. The note said, "Keep baking," which is the same as keep breathing when you translate it into my language. Midweek, I found a small padded envelope in my mailbox with no return address. Inside, wrapped in tissue, lay the magnolia bracelet. No note, no confession, just the charm catching late sun. I turned it over, felt the groove of the engraving under my thumb, the date we all pretended meant the same thing. I didn't put it on. I dropped it into the dented metal box in the storage unit, in the folder labeled Truth, because some symbols ask to be archived, not worn. A day later, Harold waited for me outside the bakery, hands deep in the pockets of a jacket too warm for the day. He had always run hot. Now he looked cold. I wanted to say sorry, he began, and I believed him in the way you believe a forecast 2 states away. Okay, I said. And to tell you, he broke off, found an easier sentence. We were lonely, Ruth. We were tired, I said. There's a difference. Tired asks for help. Lonely asks for audience. He looked over my shoulder at the glass case like it might remember him. I miss the kitchen at night, he murmured, when the house was quiet and the dough rose like it had faith. You sold your seat at that table, I said softly. You don't get to miss it out loud with me. He nodded like he expected worse and deserved it. If you ever need anything, I need you to sign what's left and stop showing up where you aren't invited, I said. That's love now. He swallowed, nodded again, and walked away like a man who had outlived the shape of his own name. Marcus and I learned the choreography of coexistence, him leaving boots by the back door, me not tripping on them, me setting aside the first slice of pecan pie, him pretending not to notice and then eating it standing up. One night he stood in the doorway with a cardboard box of trophies and school papers and a photograph of him at 5 in a paper crown. You want this? He asked. I want you, I said. He smiled with his eyes shut, the way he does when he's trying to keep salt water where it belongs. He found words in small allotments. I keep seeing it, he admitted, staring at the middle distance where fire lives, like a call you can't turn off. He laughed without humor. I've pulled people out of worse. It hits different when it's your house. I didn't tell him time heals. Time does what it wants. Healing is a choice people have to keep making. When you hear it, I said, change something in the room. Turn on a light. Open a window. Eat something sweet. Make your body a place that can't host the picture for long. He nodded like a student taking notes on a science you can't diagram. Selena called with the tone she reserves for good news delivered in plain envelopes. Judge granted the preliminary injunction in full, she said. We're on the calendar for final hearings. It'll be dull. Dull is your friend. I hung up and wrote, Dull is my friend on a sticky note and pressed it to the inside of the flower bin next to the chaplain's card. Faith and law, right there where I keep the ingredient that lets everything rise. We made small expansions at the bakery, an extra Saturday class for kids who wanted to learn sugar cookies, a late-night coffee window for the nurses getting off at odd hours. I added a new item to the menu board, still proud pound cake, and watched people order it with the kind of smile you offer a woman in a good dress at her own party. Mr. Hank told me it needed bourbon. Miss Ella told him Jesus didn't. We compromised with vanilla. When the first check arrived from Harold's lawyer, a token of property settlement agreed under pressure and law, I opened a new account with a name that made the bank teller look up and grin. Future Ruth. LC. I told Marcus I would transfer shares of the bakery to him slowly, measured like sugar. We're not rushing you into a life you didn't choose, I said, but if you ever want it, it will be ready. You think I'm a baker? He asked, amused. I think you know fire and rescue, I said. Ovens are just the civilized version. That night, I stood in my kitchen and held the magnolia charm in my palm one more time before the box swallowed it. I thought about all the women I've known who deserved medals and got casseroles, who buried their pride and called it patience, who kept their roofs from leaking with nothing but grit and a good ladder. I thought about mercy as a verb with a timer attached. Mercy is not pretending nothing happened. Mercy is not letting what happened tell you who you are. The city settled, as cities do. New scandals arrived to feed the phones. In the quiet between morning mixers and lunch rush, I practiced a different kind of patience, the kind that doesn't wait for anyone else to change, only for yeast to do what yeast does. The ovens hummed, the bell chimed, The chalk squeaked, "Heat, time, rise." And I believed my own handwriting. If you're wondering whether I felt lonely, I did, in the clean, honest way that doesn't demand witnesses. I bought a pair of red shoes that looked ridiculous and wore them to the grocery store just to prove the floor would hold. I signed up for a swing night at the community center and learned I could still laugh without breaking. I put a plant in Harold's old chair and watered it like forgiveness, regularly, without drama, expecting it to take root in its own time. On a Thursday that smelled like rain, Marcus walked in at closing with takeout I didn't have to pretend to like. He set the bags down and said, "Mom, do you ever think about what comes next?" His voice was level, eyes clear, the look firefighters get when a fire is finally out, and now it's paperwork and hoses and the quiet pride of a job done with care. "Yes," I said, flipping the sign to closed for the night. "Every morning." "And?" he asked. "And tomorrow," I said, smiling, "we add honey to the cornbread, and I call the city about permits for more outdoor tables, and we learn a new croissant fold I pretended to go to Nashville for, and you," I tapped his chest lightly, "you figure out if you want lemon bars or peach cobbler on your days off, because a man should know at least that much about himself." He laughed, the kind that reaches the corners. "Peach," he said. "Good choice," I answered, because it was, and because so much of surviving is letting yourself recognize a good thing without flinching. I locked the door, turned off the lights, and stood a moment in the dark listening to the bakery settle, the small ticks and sighs of metal cooling, the honest little noises of a space that had worked hard and gotten it right, the questions that had driven me, how, who, when, why, had given way to the only one worth baking a life around. What now? Now, we keep opening. Now, we keep loving what's left and building what's next. Now, we keep choosing heat that cooks instead of burns, time that heals instead of hides, and a rise that is ours to claim. By the time the pecans started dropping heavy in the churchyard, the shouting had thinned to a rumor, and the law had caught up to our facts. Courtrooms are not made for poetry. They are made for endings. The judge read from a script the system writes for people who have lost the right to improvise. Findings, orders, a sequence of language that sounded like metal, clicking into place. Divorce, granted. Exclusive possession of the house, to me. Permanent injunction, entered. Business interests, confirmed. Insulated, mine. No contact provisions. Clear enough that even a man who had forgotten how to read a room could read a page. Harold stood beside his lawyer with the slumped dignity of a man tidy enough to be ashamed, but not brave enough to be transformed. Tiffany wore a dress the color of apology and kept her eyes on the table. There were no speeches, no appeals to memory. Civilization is paperwork. When the clerk stamped the last copy, the echo was smaller than I'd imagined and kinder. Not a gavel, just the sound of something that had been wobbling finally finding its notch. Outside, the day had that crisp Atlanta blue that makes even ordinary buildings look like they've been washed. Selena walked me down the courthouse steps with her lawyer's stride, the one that says we are not asking favor. We are collecting what is due. "Final," she said, as if the word were a warm coat. "You did it the right way." I believed her because I'd earned the right to. We didn't celebrate with champagne. We celebrated with honey cornbread at the bakery. Me, Marcus, Loretta, Pastor Green, and Jay, who showed up in a tie he ironed himself as if court had been church. We sat at the stainless table after closing and ate with our fingers, the 5 of us witnesses to a small, excellent quiet. Pastor set a folded card beside my plate. Do justly. Love mercy. Walk humbly. I touched the words like they were knobs on a stove I knew by heart. You want to know about Marcus. My boy learned to say the hard sentence without letting it burn his throat. He went to counseling at the station and sat in a room where men try not to look at each other while naming the shape of pain. He started running at dawn through the park, then would swing by the bakery for coffee and stand in the back doorway while I checked the first rise. Sometimes he talked, sometimes he just breathed in the sugar air that has always told him he was home. He got promoted, lieutenant now, and one Saturday taught a fire safety class to a pack of third graders in the parking lot. They put on little plastic helmets and asked if fire is alive. He looked over at me and smiled that dry Carter smile I made, and he perfected. It behaves like it is, he said, and handed out sticker badges to kids who clapped like he'd invented water. You're wondering if Tiffany wrote me. She didn't. She left the bracelet in my mailbox. No note then, no note after. Good. Not every chapter gets an epilogue, and not every symbol asks to be redeemed. I put it back in the dented metal box in the storage unit, a reliquary for what I survived, and shut the lid. The past can stay catalogued and quiet. Harold tried once more, a month too late, to say the words that come after men realize the ground under their feet was not a porch, but a plank. He stood outside the bakery at dusk, the sign flipped to closed, and told me he had found a church on the other side of town. He said he was sorry he hadn't been a better husband, said he still dreamed about the kitchen at night. I told him I hoped he'd be a better man going forward. I told him the kitchen would forgive him. It forgives everyone who shows up early and works clean. I told him there wasn't a place for him in mine. Mercy isn't the absence of consequence. It's the absence of cruelty. We stood in that slim mercy a moment, two old people who had once danced in the place where our refrigerator hums, and then he went where he had to go. The internet moved on, as internet does, to a celebrity haircut and a mayoral gaffe. The neighborhood did what neighborhoods do when given time, remembered what we were before the noise, and decided to keep it. We added outdoor tables with little vases of zinnias. We ran a late-night window for nurses getting off their shift. We offered a Saturday class where kids cut sugar cookie stars while Miss Ella told them the difference between a miracle and good technique. Mr. Hank lobbied for bourbon in the pound cake and lost again to Jesus. He didn't mind losing. He liked the argument. Business grew in the modest way that lets you sleep. One more oven, 2 new hires, an extra shelf for the pecan tassies people buy by the dozen and swear they'll save but never do. I opened an account called Future Ruth, LLC, and learned a new croissant fold from the workshop I never attended, watched videos, tore up my first 5 tries, made the 6th decent enough to feed to friends. I moved 3% of the bakery into Marcus's name, then 3 more a month later. I told him it wasn't a promise he had to keep. It was a key on the hook by the door. If he ever needed it, he'd know where to find it. On a Tuesday that smelled like rain, a girl of maybe 16 came in with a school notebook and nerves. "Can I ask you something for my civics project?" she said, voice wobbling. "About, women who rebuild." I wiped my hands and said yes. She asked if revenge was the point. I told her no. The point was survival with your name intact. She asked how you know when you're done. I told her you're never done. You just get better at distinguishing noise from music. She wrote everything down with a concentration so fierce I wanted to hire it. I kept my red shoes. I wore them to swing night at the community center and laughed when I missed a step, and then didn't miss the next one. A kind man named Walter with kind knuckles and a quiet backstory asked if he could be my second song, and I said yes, because I've made a promise not to break what I intend to keep, and that includes my own joy. We danced badly and well in equal measure, and I went home feeling tall. Some afternoons I still drive by the storage unit, unlock the metal door, and touch the file labeled truth. Not to wallow, to remember that proof is not punishment. Proof is protection. Then I lock the door, thank the empty space for keeping its secrets the way secrets should be kept, quietly, in context, and go back to the work that loves me best. There were invitations I did not accept, television people who wanted me to retell my life between ad breaks, a magazine that proposed a photo spread titled Against All Odds with a stylist who didn't know heat from warmth. I said no. I baked. I took pastor's wife a pie. I taught a retired bus driver how to braid challah, even though it wasn't my tradition, because bread is a language that lets strangers mean well at each other. On the anniversary of Sweet Magnolia's opening, we set a long table down the middle of the bakery and fed everyone who ever washed a pan for me. The ovens ran like engines of simple goodness. Marcus stood and tapped a spoon against his glass and said, "To my mother," and then stopped, because men who run into fire do not always know how to run into praise. He cleared his throat and tried again. "To the person who taught me that heat can cook or it can burn, and you get to choose which." The room made that warm sound people make when the right words finally find the right person. I took the toast and put it where I keep the lifelines. When the night was done and the floor mopped and the last chair turned up, I walked the length of the bakery with the lights off and my hand on the wall, feeling the ticks of cooling metal like a gratitude you can hear. The questions that had chased me, the who, the how could he, the will we be okay, had softened into better ones. Who am I now? A woman whose name fits. How do I spend my heat? On what rises? What do I do with the empty chair at the table? Put a plant in it until someone worthy sits there. What do I owe the people who hurt me? Nothing I cannot give without losing myself. What do I owe the people who stayed? Bread, laughter, steadiness, a front door that opens at 5. I sleep with the window cracked and the house alarm set to a code only my hands know. In the mornings, before the sky decides, I stand in the kitchen and write the day's special on the chalkboard. Sometimes it's still proud pound cake. Sometimes it's second chances scones because I like the way it sounds, not because I'm handing them out like candy. And sometimes, when the air is right and my bones are steady and the world feels exactly as fragile and faithful as it is, I write 3 words that have carried me farther than anything else: heat, time, rise. I swapped a bottle and pulled a thread and let the light in. Yes. But the real miracle was smaller and harder. I refused to be hurried by anyone's chaos, but my own clock. I measured what mattered. I gathered what I could keep. I waited until the bell rang true. My name is Ruth Carter. I am 68 years old, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia. I run a bakery that smells like mornings and second chances. I kept my house, my business, my boy, and my name. The rest, cataloged and put away. The future, cooling on the rack, golden and done, waiting for a knife I will lift when I'm ready, and not a moment sooner. And that's how it all happened. Life can be cruel. It can shake you. And sometimes the people you trust most can betray you in ways you never imagined. But even then, you have to stay human. You have to hold on to your dignity, and you have to keep moving forward. I survived not because I wanted revenge, but because I chose myself. If this story touched you, make sure to subscribe to the channel, give this video a like, and leave a comment with your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Here, you'll find many more powerful stories about ordinary people who went through extraordinary hardships and deep betrayals, yet found the strength to rise again.